I just want to welcome everybody for coming. People on vacation, crazy, spend it at the Saltmarsh for. Sorry, I didn't mean to let the word out.
It's okay.
It is. So we're going to do our third Nantucket GAM about Madaket.
We didn't intend to be late. We had to go back.
And we have Fran Cartoonin, who is going to moderate, ask questions, keep everybody moving along, and Bill Breeder, who grew up in Madaket, and a few other people, I'm sure. So take it away.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, if you were expecting Maurice, I hope you're not disappointed. Maurice Gibbs and I are first cousins. Our grandparents were surfmen Maurice Gibbs the first, who served at Madaket Station, and Hilda Osterberg Gibbs, who came to Nantucket from Finland. And I have to say, Maurice, his sister Ellen, and I, and our Aunt Esther have all spent time in Finland, but we're really invested in Nantucket history. So Maurice has an appointment off island today, and he asked me to stand in for him, and he gave me his cheat sheet. And the first thing he asked for was to have a map up here. This is 1869 map, and on the map you can see how Smith's Point extends all the way past Tuckanuck, but at the very tip it says Smith's Point. And according to that impeccable source of Nantucket history, Argument Settlers, which is full of mistakes, but anyway, according to Argument Settlers, it says the last time somebody forded over to Tuckanuck from this long strip of land was in 1869, and it was a guy named Isaac Folger who drove a horse and wagon to Tuckanuck. And then in September of that same year, September 1869, a storm cut off that long spit. And then what we think of as Smith's Point became Smith's Point, and the spit very quickly eroded away. So the other thing Maurice wanted pointed out is beyond the point there, that long point, there's two little islands, which haven't been there for a really long time. Does anybody remember what they were called?
Gravel.
The Gravelly Islands. And one of them actually had a building on it. People went there, and does anybody know what that was all about? That was a smallpox inoculation station.
Can you hear it?
And people went there and were inoculated for smallpox and stayed until they were determined not to be infectious anymore. And since then it's washed away. But that inoculation station was founded in 1771 by a Dr. Samuel Gelston, who had been doing the same operation at Vineyard Haven on the vineyard, and then came to Nantucket and set one up there. And the Quakers were totally against smallpox inoculation. They said it was God's will who got smallpox, and by getting inoculated against it, you were going against God's will. So in the NHA Research Library, there's a book called The Book of Objections, in which the Quakers wrote down all the things people got in trouble for. And you got in trouble if you sailed on an armed vessel. You got in trouble if you hung out with Freemasons. You got in trouble if you didn't wear your hair quite right. And you got in trouble if you got inoculated against smallpox. So that was what the Gravelly Islands supported until they washed away. And so there's one map that shows at one time how much longer Smith's Point was. And I came up with another little map as well. This was from 1835. And it doesn't show the Gravelly Islands, actually. But it's kind of a cute map. So here we begin the real Madaket GAM. Everybody knows what this is?
Coast Guard Station.
It's the Madaket life-saving station, and then at a certain point when the life-saving service and the U.S. Revenue Cutter Service merged, they became Coast Guard. and then it was a Coast Guard station. And Maurice's and my grandfather served at the station. So Maurice started looking for documentation of Madaket Station, and he couldn't find any for the longest time. And then he discovered that up until 1905, it wasn't called the Madaket Station, it was called the Great Neck Station. And if we look back at this map, we actually can see that this part here was, on that map it's called Great Neck. From 1890, when it was commissioned, until 1905, it wasn't called the Madaket Station. When did it go out of business?
Well, when I was a kid, it was still in existence and on the end, tail end of it. And Millie's house was, I'm sure everybody knows where it used to be, not where her cottage is by the bridge. But at the corner of Ames and Madaket Road, there was a big old house there, and that was Millie's, where she raised dogs for the government. And she was a tough old coot. The station was quite a ways out, and of course the beach all went away. And when that station closed down, Millie took on the role of standing on the roof of her house, looking out at the water and calling up and telling them they better get their butts out there. She didn't use the word butts, that something was up. And going back to the life-saving station, there actually was a much smaller one on the island of Madaket. My grandfather was born on Tuckanuck, and his father was stationed at Madaket. And if you go out to the Life-Saving Museum, which now is the shipwreck/life-saving, and you go to where the whaleboat is and stuff in that corner, the pictures of the short little fat guy with the big cork vest, that was my great-grandfather, Erastus. And from the size of him, you kind of think they didn't need life jackets because he had enough buoyancy amongst his body to pull him up there. But that station was very active, and then when he went off duty, he rode over to Tuckanuck where they lived. And they ran out of food at one point. They actually, not so much they ran out of food, they got tired of eating eel and fish. So they did a quick little project where they tied pork to a hook, to a string, to a stake in the ground, and they captured some seagulls to try that to have some meat, as they said. And according to my grandfather, his father said it was the worst tasting stuff he ever had. And they couldn't wait to go back to eating eel, even if it was bad. So getting back to Millie, she also, I'm sure those that were here at the time remember her little store that she had. She was not a harmful person, but then again, she didn't get awards for being huggy and kissy. And if you were silly enough to help yourself to the ice cream, even though you'd put your money in the little jar there,
Right.
she would close the, she'd come in, she was a big woman, but she walked like a cat. And the next thing you know, you had searing pain up your arm because she'd slam the ice chest on you.
I remember she said that her ice cream came in colors, not flavors.
Yes.
So there was black, white, tan, and tan with spots. And tan with spots was peach.
She also was, she was one rugged individual. At the time, my father had a distributorship for Coke, Canada Dry, Cleco Club, and their cases were these big wooden cases, and it was all, the big quart bottles and stuff, and the cases, I think, weighed more than I did, and so for me to take a case off the truck and take it into her little store there, I was grunting and groaning and struggling, and I'd get hip checked. I didn't even know what a hip check was then, but I'd get hip checked out of the way by her, and Millie says, "For Christ's sakes," and she grabbed one in each hand and she walked in, and, so.
Yeah, I think you can see them piled up in this photo.
She was, she was a real classic individual that she probably would be, if there's any sort of connection between people that go to the great restaurant in the sky, and she'd be having a coronary knowing what's going on out there now.
Well, Millie was pretty upset when they closed the Coast Guard station on the 1st of January 1947. And who knows what happened that very day? Anybody remember what happened? Yeah.
There was a wreck. I remember that part of it.
Yeah. The very day it was closed, and Millie saw it and called town.
Was it a brick?
Yeah. It was a Greek vessel named the Kotor, K-O-T-O-R, and it was way off course, and it went aground the very day that there wasn't anybody at the Coast Guard station anymore. But I think that was probably why Millie got to be, what was she, an honorary bosun?
I'm not sure what her title, she was honorary, she was honorary and honorary. She had no qualms about letting the commandant down at Brand Point know when they were slacking. And really, I think that was one of the first times that the Coast Guard got recognition for helping elderly, if you will, because they would come out, pick her up, and take her grocery shopping. She saved their bacon more than once.
She was famously strong. Does anybody know the story of the shark?
Oh, yes, it was, yeah.
Somebody want to tell the story of Millie and the shark?
Well, she caught it with a pitchfork, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, she went out in a boat, and then it was in the Herald Tribune. I remember I was in college, and my grandmother sent me the article about Millie catching the shark because it was coming in the creek there, and then she went out and killed it with a pitchfork.
Shark should have known better.
She also used to
Oh, yeah, for sure.
patrol the creek, even though that wasn't her official domain. There was a few of us that had some flat-bottom skiffs, and so we used to go hell-bent for leather up and down the creek until Mrs. Bartlett, the current Franklin that lives on Pleasant Street, his parents, Ralph and whatever, and the whistle would blow and it was time to come in and stop playing. But every time we saw Millie, it would, you damn kids going too fast in the creek. So she didn't say anything while we're doing it, but then she'd get word to the folks that, Billy was a bad boy. Not the first time they heard that.
Does anybody know that Millie actually got married once?
Didn't last very long.
That's not what I heard.
Didn't she go running after him? Didn't she go chasing after him?
So somebody else has to tell the story. I need to know. She was he like sort of mail order husband?
Yeah.
I remember what the story was she had a mail order husband who discovered he wasn't really into what or got into something he didn't bargain for. He ran away, ended up over in New Bedford. And she went after him, caught him, brought him back.
Really?
And he lasted about a year, and then he ran away again. Just not a
Well, I found a couple of pictures of her dogs, and the dark dog, it said his name was Sultan, but the dog that I remember is the big white dog, and I don't know what the big white dog's name was. Does anybody know?
Snoopy.
Really? Oh, that's the one I recall from first. But she had a lot of kennels. At some point, she must have had a lot of dogs she was training for the military, right?
Yeah.
I have a Millie story that was told to me by Andy Lowell. He said he was working on a roof in Madaket one day, and he saw a car come up and pull into the driveway to Millie's old house, and a man got out, walked up to the house, knocked on the door, and went in. And a little while passed, and he came out, and he walked halfway back to the car, stood there for a minute or two, turned around and went back in the house. And he did that about 3 times, and then he came out and got in his car and started to leave. And Andy was so curious, he flagged the guy down and said, "Pardon me, I just can't help it. What was going on?" And the man said, "Well, I'm an insurance adjuster, and Miss Jewett has a claim, but she opened scallops in her kitchen sink, and the smell in the kitchen is so bad. I had to get going out for fresh air." But I know she also had a shanty, because I've seen pictures of the shanty, but I guess sometimes it was just more convenient to do it at home. Maurice left me a note about when he and his sister Ellen and his dad lived in Madaket for 3 years, from 1937 to 1940. And he said when they lived there, there were no structures on the Long Pond side of Madaket Road. And he said, and only 4 of us rode the school bus that was run by the Wood brothers. And it was Norma and Herman Minstrel and Maurice's sister Ellen and Maurice. So
Yeah, as a kid, my grandparents bought the Madaket land in the early 30s for a summer place, because once my uncle died as a young boy in Florida, my grandparents stopped going to Tuckanuck. And so this was the next best thing. They bought the Madaket land. And as a kid, I remember going over Second Bridge, which is really now Second Culvert. And if you want to get into Libby Gibson's car, just call them First and Second Culvert, and she'll know that you've been talking to me. But we came around the corner, and he pointed at the land from Second Bridge all the way around, and he goes, "So you're never going to see any houses built there. That's not worth nothing. Not near the water. Who's ever going to build there?" So you fast forward to now, I never should have listened to him. Because you could have bought it for a cent.
Yeah.
But one of the things that strikes me with all of the, and I'm glad Martha's here because I'm going to toss this to her, but with all of the big house moves and stuff that are going on, and how structures all of a sudden appear someplace they were never near, there is somebody, Martha, who knows all about East meeting West.
East meeting West?
Yeah.
All right. Mr. Welch went bankrupt in Wisconsin. He ran a store. So Mr. Martin bought half of the Welch store. And between he and Bartlett's and a few others, they moved that store from Sconset to Madaket. Mr. Martin was known for documenting everything. I have a little black book that tells every move that they made, what their troubles were, who worked that day, what tractor they used. They forgot to notify the light company because of the wires, but they finally made it to Madaket, and it took 2 or 3 days to do it. And the house that Sonny and I lived in, our first home, was this house in Madaket. And after we sold it, it was named Queequeg. I think a lot of you might know where it is. But it's still there, it looks the same, it hasn't changed a bit on the outside. My 3 children were raised there. And
Another house
Tristan's
move.
Landing, at that time,
Yeah.
there was nothing. Sonny used to go pheasant hunting in Tristan's Landing. I used to go Mayflower hunting in Tristan's Landing. And when Mr. Perry came and put up 2 or 3 prefabs, we said, uh-oh, no one is going to live over there. Why would they live there? You can see the place now. We moved out in 1960 and came to town.
Another house that got moved, so who knows, everybody knows the Madaket fire station? The one with no people. But that structure has moved twice. And originally came from the Coast Guard station way at the end there, when it was the life-saving, before it actually became the Coast Guard station. And so that's where it originated. And then it went over by Mr. Rogers Beach. I think that's Rhode Island. It comes out to Mass Ave there. And it was a gatehouse kind of a thing, boathouse kind of a thing. And then it got moved from there to where it currently is. And there's still a couple of people around that moved it. Walter Barrett was hired to move the thing, and so they had Lloyd Arnold, who still lives in Ireland. He worked for Walter at the time, and the house, the building just made it over the Millie's Bridge, and it took a lot of time because they only had a couple of inches on either side, and they had to keep finagling the bagel there. But we did find some pictures of that move. So there is a plaque that commemorates how that land came to the town, but now that I think about it, there's really no plaque designating where that thing really originated from. So I have to put that on the to-do list.
It's not like where it originated, is now under water.
Yeah,
Because where this Coast Guard station was, I think, is
way out.
Malcolm's got something to say.
You're talking about moving houses. When the water broke through over there across the creek, going down to Jackson's Point, all the land between Madaket Road and what was established as Old Madaket Village was empty lots, and they filled up all those lots with those houses from over there. As quick as they could get them out of there, the sand was disappearing, and they ended up putting some of them up on Madaket Road. I don't know just what year that was, but my family goes back into the 1920s out there in Madaket, when Sconset became the high society summer place. Madaket became the Nantucket summer resort. And Edward Tice, Earl Ray, my grandfather, William Soverino, Ralph Bartlett, yeah, Gibby Manta, and another one, the name slips me right now. They all built right on the edge of the creek, on the high ground. And when this became necessary to move in from Jackson's Point, there was quite a few empty lots there, and they brought quite a few of those houses in before they went overboard. But times change. Those houses that were originally built there were all seasonal homes. They were all single-story houses, and great thought had been put into blocking somebody else's view. That seems to have disappeared. Earl Ray's house has gone through generations, of course. A couple of years ago sold, and they built a house there, I swear it must be 3 stories high. And I don't think the afternoon sun could get to what was my grandfather's house now. It is huge, it blocks everything. But in later years, my sweetheart and I bought a house in Nantucket that was part of the Bobby Ray family house. Bobby built one, and Jane got a house just like it. Stuart died, we bought Jane's house. Best move we ever made. And when we bought that house, traveling out to Madaket, you went by Dionis Road. There wasn't another house all the way till you got to the dump. And there was a little traffic in and out of the dump. And a few years later, they moved the Department of Public Works out there. Then there was more traffic out there. Beyond that, Clint Andrews' house, up almost at the corner of Fisher's Landing Road. Fisher's Landing, just the old farmhouse was there. We used to take the dog over there for a walk, the only place around. And continuing around, Red Gate Corner was always Red Gate Corner. The bridges were wood in those days.
Yeah.
And you got up to Cambridge Street, that's the one that goes down to the boatyard. There was nothing on either side of Madaket Road till you got there. And there was one house, Allison Pease, way down next to the creek on the north side of Madaket Road, nothing on the south side. And as you said, whatever the man's name was, started developing on the south side of Madaket Road. Who the heck would ever want to live over there? Can't even see water.
They made 500.
Yeah. But anyway, it seemed to be successful.
Who owned Eelskin Inn?
Yeah. And then going up the Madaket Road, of course,
Huh?
as we've been out there a few years, the fire department kept a truck down at the boatyard. Occasionally they'd remember it and go down there, the battery'd be dead, you couldn't go anywhere. So the fire chief came out to me and he said, would you be interested in exercising the fire truck once in a week or whatever? And he said, we're going to build a building right up here by where it is now. And we'll bring the truck out and you take it, do anything you want with it, make sure you know how to operate it. And whatever you need, let us know, we'll take care of it. So I did that for a few years, and there were a few things that had to be done on the truck to keep it operational. But one of the things I used to do, and I enjoyed it very much, take the truck and go up and get Millie. Hey, Millie, would you like to go for a ride? Oh yeah, sure. So she'd get in the truck and we'd take a ride down. Sometimes as far as the dump, just to exercise. And one day Millie said to me, you know, you check the fire pumps and all that kind of stuff. Do you ever check and make sure the wheels are bolted on right? So you can't have the wheel fall off. And, no, Millie, I don't either, but I think they were all right. But my experience in Madaket was very good. I worked in town for a number of years, and then I got through work in town, and Walter Barrett said to me, my man is getting old and he's going to retire. I said, would you like to come and help with me? I said, sure, I'll go with you. So Walter was a man that was running a service to Tuckanuck and back. So we had quite an experience doing that. Everything you can imagine, including taking a fire truck over there. And take people, dogs, babies, children, food, liquor, propane gas, whatever they needed over there, we took over. One of the interesting things was, to me anyway, Walter always carried a wallet that was at least that thick. And a lot of these people on Tuckanuck were seasonal people. And they'd say to Walter, "Can you cash a check?" "Oh yeah, sure, I can cash a check. How much?" "Well, we're going shopping, probably 200. "Okay." Walter get out his wallet, take rubber bands off it. Took out the wallet, he counted it all out, and there you go. They take the money, start counting it. "Walter, I'm one shy." "There's nothing wrong, you know how to count, here's the other one."
He also, he had a Suburban, which is, the Suburban is a big giant SUV. He had this Suburban, and it was hard to tell where the front and the back were because there was so much crap in the back that it also was on the front, and you could barely see his head when he was driving because his dashboard was just covered with stuff, and it had, he had the thing for years, and I don't think it ever got swept out, let alone cleaned out. And he had a house next to the Episcopal Church on Fair Street. So one day we bumped into him and he said, "Oh, I'm going to go get my new vehicle." I said, "Well, that's going to be quite something to see him touting around town in a new vehicle." Well, the next day, what it was a brand new vehicle that looked the same. Because all he did was he took all the stuff and put it in the new vehicle. Trash and everything just went in. We said, "Walter, why don't you just..." Nope, couldn't be bothered. And he had this dog, Queenie, and he probably had the first sanctioned unleashed dog in the island. And Queenie would be puttering around the dock and stuff, and he'd just stand up and he'd holler, "Board!" And the dog would come flying down, jump on the boat, because if the dog didn't, he'd leave it. But he was another one. He was a tough old bird. Another guy the Andrews brothers that worked for him, Clint and George. And funny little story about them. One day I was with my father, we bumped into him at Allen's Diner for coffee, and so Clint's there, and he says, talking to my father, and I was just sitting there thinking that I'm getting away drinking coffee that my mother's not going to know about. And so he says to my father, he says, "You know the difference between me and my brother?" So my father says, "No, I don't know. What is the difference between you and your brother?" He said, "Well, my brother's..." He said, "I'm stupid and know it. My brother's stupid and don't know it." And he was another one. He's another one that had every penny that came across.
Was Walter a selectman, am I correct in remembering that? Yeah.
It was on the volunteer fire department.
He was full-time. Because when I put full-time in January of '74, Walter says, "You gotta remember two things, boy. It was burning when they called, it'll be burning when you get there. Keep your foot the hell out of the carburetor." And when they come up with the house numbers, those numbers on that house, they'd start to argue with him. And look, you're laying in the backyard with a broken leg. You can't go out and flag that ambulance down. The house is on fire. Those Indians send up smoke signals for us.
He also was one of the few that could drive the hook and ladder with it. And it had the big wooden giant ladders and stuff.
That thing.
And that thing was so difficult to drive, you had to have a rolling stop before you could start turning the wheel because you needed to have some momentum there. So he was another one that was far stronger than he looked. And I think the selectmen's was the only time they see him once in a while, and he
Dressed
With
up.
the tie
dressed up, yeah.
And was a good guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the first town meeting I ever went to, I couldn't get over. They were talking about money for a new fire engine or something. X number of thousands of dollars. No discussion. They were talking about need to buy something else, thousands of dollars. No discussion. They were talking about the Madaket ditches. And somebody wanted to widen the ditches. And the conversation went on for about an hour and 10 minutes or whatever. So finally Walter stood up and he goes, "Them damn ditches was dug by the Indians. If they were good enough for them, they're good enough for me." And he sat down, but he was and that's how he was as a selectman. There was just no nonsense.
Bill, may I mention something about the 1952 snowstorm? I was working at the telephone company at the time, and it snowed real hard. Sonny got in touch with me, he says, "Can you get through work early?" I said, "No way, I've got to wait until my takeover comes in." So I got through work, and it was really snowing. I went up to my mother-in-law's. She lent me a heavy coat and some pants, and Sonny and I took off with a four-wheel drive Jeep for Madaket. We got as far as Swains Hill. He says, "We are going back to town. This is not good." It was 3 weeks before we ever got back to Madaket. But the next day, Walter Barrett and Sonny worked themselves to Madaket finally, because they wanted to drain the houses and things like that. But that was a bad snowstorm, real bad.
9 days in Wisconsin with no electricity, that's.
Yeah. It took 3 weeks for us to ever get back home.
I don't know what year it was, but we had a bad snowstorm. And I had to go to work at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I got over the first bridge coming in all right, but then I got down past Clint Andrews' house, couldn't get any further.
Yeah,
And luckily I was able to back out of there
yeah.
and get home again. Telephone lines were dead, couldn't
Yeah,
talk to
everything.
anyone.
Yeah.
But electric lights were still on, that was good.
That happened in 1978 when the Madaket was out without lights and everything. Because all on, is it Eel Point Road, where all wires were icy and everything?
Must have been the blizzard of
It took
'78.
a few days before it got back on, I think, the Madaket.
One of the things that helped keep power going in Madaket was the fact that we bought a generator. And after we bought it, they didn't lose power. So we're trying to get people to chip in for that, but
That's the first thing Jack bought when he retired from the electric company, was a generator. Or does that tell you about the electric?
There's also a record that's held in Madaket. Madaket resident is the only one that I ever heard of on Nantucket that hit a cow on the way to work and killed it. Dickie Weldon. Yeah, one of Charlie Thurston's cows right by your new lane. He said you come out over that little hill and the sun was just the right angle, you couldn't see the front of the car.
it's also, Madaket's also the only place where 2 telephone trucks did a head-on. So down at Eel Point Road, actually it was down, Dionis Way. Wasn't Todd, of course. And before there was cable, there was this different kind of, it was a cable where it was different kind. It wasn't encapsulated in a cover. It was heavy insulation on each pair of wires. And of course it went from pole to pole. And when they had problems and the wire broke, oftentimes what they would have to do was just eyeball the cable as they drove down and looked up. So there was somebody out there who had enough pull that they sent 2 people out to try to find where the problem was. One started at one end and one started at the other, and you can imagine what was happening. They were driving along, looking up at the thing there, and all of a sudden they found a problem, but there was a vehicle in front of them, not the wire. So the 2 telephone trucks smashed into each other. Eddie Bowen was in charge of the phone company at the time, and guys like Henry Fee, Jimmy Killen, Harold Anderson,
Cody.
yep, Joe Cody, Bud Stockley, the guy that married Dottie Kenny across from the J.C. house. They had a guest house there.
Morris.
Chuck Morris.
Chuck Morris. Herman Johnson. And there was a full contingent on island, far cry from today, where there's nobody here, and they come over on the boat. But there was a telephone on Tuckanuck. There was a cable that went underneath, and there was a phone booth up there, and that's how you would communicate back. Previous to that, you had to before Walter was doing the schlepping back and forth. That's what my grandfather did for many years. And then they would go to town and get groceries and stuff for the summer folks that were there, the Lafarges and Clarks and whatever. But that's, that all changed. They got a telephone. They also got Mel said they had a fire truck, and it was one of the dead end ones from the town here, and
Is that the one that's still there?
no, this one's been replaced not too long ago, and it was a real danger, because when you hit the button to coil the hose in, it wasn't, you couldn't do it wasn't any sort of
Full speed.
tension. It was either off or on, and when it was on, it went 100 miles an hour. So it was a real problem. And so the firehouse was built, and volunteer fire department over there, and any of us that had property there became a fireman. And so they ran a course once a year on how to run the thing. They also combined it with a homeowners meeting. So Bam Lafarge was taken over from the Australian. I'll think of his name. I'll think of his name in a minute. Brown, Diana Brown's husband. Colin, who was was a Australian war hero, and they had a house there and stuff, and he was taking care of his fire engine, and that the town so generously gave him. Well, it's a liability they gave the people. But in the instructional period, those of us that are trying to pay attention, all you could hear was the rest of the folks there talking about how delicious the cookies and breakfast food was. In the meantime, there's this life and death thing. So finally, the town got rid of it. There's another one there.
Maurice, by the way, mentioned the 1967 crash of a super Constellation at Madaket. That was a time when I wasn't here. He said there was a fiery crash, and there was one survivor, a flight engineer.
Is that in the head of the plane?
I think it probably was, yeah. He says, fiery Madaket shore crash.
Yeah, I vaguely remember.
Yeah, that
1967.
was one of those Air Force
You remember that?
Constellation radar planes out of Otis.
Uh-huh. Oh.
And I remember the chief from Brent Point was living at Sankety Lake. He damn near ran me over going through Wisconsin to get out there. So,
Yeah, because they had the Loran Tower.
yeah.
So I found this picture of Millie and Mr. Rogers, and Maurice wanted me to show the picture of the house too.
Crooked house.
The Crooked house. Here's something I remember from when I was a kid. Remember those?
Oh, yes.
And how as you drove to Madaket, they would line up different ways. So you'd see 5, and then it would look like you only saw 3 because they were lined up.
My brother used to change the bulbs on those at the top.
You just,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
They used to climb those and change the bulbs.
Yep,
What is
used to
it?
come up to the ones at the Roman station.
Getting back to Tuckanuck, when I went with Walter, we not only had a boatload of stuff to take over, but that we used to deliver it to different families all over the island. And at one time, long before I went there, they had a school on Tuckanuck. And over near the Chapel property, there was a pile of rubble, and Walter identified that as what was left of the schoolhouse, looking down over North Pond.
There was a unique recycling thing there, where when vehicles were no longer in use, you'd take them up to Bigelow's Point, which is closest to the vineyard, only fitting, I might add, and they'd push them over the bank into the water, and the things would sink, and then fish would get around them, and crabs and stuff, and it actually would help with erosion. So I can remember we took the Model A, and it was a group effort to get these things over the bank. So there was 5 or 6 men and a bunch of us kids were there pushing the thing over. So the next morning we went down fishing by the Humane House and looking out, and all of a sudden the Model A comes floating over. So the call went out, we had to get the thing back in and tow it up to Bigelow's and sink it again. You'd have a fit if you did that.
Well, it was a tricky boat trip getting in and out of Tuckanuck.
Still is.
And Walter used to set the buoys for that. That was always an experience too.
Yeah.
And looking at the buoys, they were discarded trash that washed ashore. And Walter made use of it. That was where the buoys going to Tuckanuck. He also made use of all the old cars in Nantucket. Anybody had an old car, Walter take it. And take it over to Tuckanuck and use it to deliver the stuff around. And when we got there, it was always the case, well, we gotta tinker with this, tinker with that, pour the gas in the carburetor, you know, and shine up the connections to the battery, because the car's always outside, you know. Sometimes they'd run, sometimes they wouldn't. Anyway, one day we were going way up to North End of the island. Excuse me, had a whole load of stuff for lavage up there. And we got rid of that, and we're on our way back, and I said, I was driving, and I said to Walter, there's something wrong with that left front wheel, it's about a foot outside the fender. Hold it, he says. So I stopped. He got out, went around, looked at it. Yeah, he said, look, turn the wheel like that and back up. I think that'll push it back. Well, we went about 2 feet.
when one of my daughters graduated from high school and the other graduated from college the same June, my Aunt Esther arranged a trip over to Tuckanuck, and Walter took us over, and there was Esther and Maurice and me and my daughters and their boyfriends of the moment and Al. We went over for the day, and we had a ride all the way around the island in one of Walter's vehicles. And this vehicle had no brakes whatsoever. If you wanted to stop, you steered into the rut until it stopped. So you didn't want to go very fast. And in Austin, Texas, where we lived at the time, they had an annual ugly truck contest. And I am sure if Walter could have entered that contest, he would have won hands down every year. Do you remember remember about these towers that they were put up and they were almost immediately felled in a big storm? And then they had to put them up again?
Only 4 fell down.
Was that
Only 4 fell down.
only 4 of the 5? When are those
Put
standing?
up Madaket.
Just been new,
He's
just
talking
been
about that.
Yeah, yeah.
He's talking about that.
So I think they went up in 46, blew down right away, and were put up again in 47, something like that.
The 5 of them put back up, they just kept the 1.
Well, there was a time when they did put them all back up, because I remember all of them being there for a bit when I was growing up, but then they went to having just one, it's true.
Another little known item is the Admiralty Club, which is in Madaket. And it's funny how things come together. I just started working, trying to go through all the documents of the club, and they've been finding stuff all over the place and trying to get it under one roof. And so come to find out, in 1934, a lady that actually at the time owned the wood box, she started to pass along 4 parcels along with another gentleman out there who just escaped from my mind, but I'll think of it. And anyhow, they gave the land to the club, so that was in 1934. And I'm just starting to gather some information that I was totally unaware of. But it was, the mission was to preserve Madaket, if you will, the way that it, and to keep it going forward. So they were instrumental in bringing, electricity to Madaket. They were instrumental in paving to Madaket. They were instrumental in a bunch of different things. It's a bit of history that was starting to slip away, so we want to make sure that, such as the fire station and stuff like that, that there is some documentation on that. Same with the mile markers. The Sconset mile markers have always been the big deal. And so when we first moved back, the first mile marker was missing. The second one is up by Ram Pasture. They were in all sorts of disarray and stuff. So I approached the town about getting them squared away and painted and stuff. And at first the DPW, under previous administration, said it was not the DPW's responsibility. It wasn't the town responsibility. So my mother at the time was still in her 10 or 12 day trip to town from Madaket. And so she said, well, that's poppycock. She said, Mary P. Walker had this thing when they were all in school, and for those that weren't doing athletics, if they did X number of walks out to the milestone marker, whichever one it was, it qualified for a letter sweater. So with that, armed with that information, I went back after the town, and we found mile marker 1, which was actually, it's now in place, but it was across the street in Puckabrush. And the thought is it got moved there when Vaughneville's used to have a greenhouse where bamboo forest is.
There's a gas station there.
Yeah, and at some point, that number 1 mile marker got moved. So we found it, and a certain gentleman named Alan Reinhardt, who is also on, well, he's on about 22 different committees, and one of those committees was able to appropriate some money, and it's now in place. And the push is on for the town to keep maintaining those. But the thing that really stuck in my craw was when I first started asking the questions, the comment from the town was, what's the big deal? It's not Sconset. And I just couldn't believe that they said that. So anyway, they're now starting to maintain it. And this year they actually painted. The last 2 times they were painted, my wife and I and Wheezy Swift did it, and then Bruce Mandel started helping out. And then this past year, Margie Sylvia's son, Ray, who does signs and stuff, he calls up and said, geez, I don't want to infringe on your territory, but do you mind if I paint those? Where the hell have you been? So the town is starting to do it.
You know, speaking of taking walks, one thing Maurice put here was about the key post at Smith's Point, and what was it and where was it?
Halfway to Smith's Point.
Halfway from
From the
Broad Creek.
end of Mass Ave to Smith's Point.
And what was it for?
That's as far as the Coast Guard would go at night and had to put the key on to make sure that they
Just to prove that they had been there.
Right.
To prove they'd been there,
Yeah.
that they'd really walked the beach.
Like a night watchman key.
Just like a
Yeah.
cascade.
They had them at Great Point, all down Pontoon
Yeah.
during World War II.
That's how they did that.
And also, the Coast Guard lost one guy that was on beach patrol from the Madaket station during World War II. Instead of staying down on the beach where he was told to go, he went up on the bank and wound up going through the ice in the long pond.
in the pond.
Really?
Yeah.
It was up on the bank.
Took them 2 or 3 days to find them.
Yeah, John Gaspey told me when I worked with him at the fire station, he says, they told us, don't go looking for him. Millie says, I'll find him with the dog. And she did.
Well, one of the big pastimes in the winter was eeling.
Yeah.
And the creek was, chock-a-block full of eels, and you'd go out there and cut a hole in the ice and use spears and stuff, and there were some good-sized eels that would come out of there. And so my wife, who came from New Bedford, before we married or right after we married, were at my parents' house, and eels was on the menu for dinner. And so she goes, what the hell? Well, it tastes like chicken.
I could see them moving in the private end.
So after that, whenever she was around, they just had to put the little pieces that wouldn't wiggle. But a couple of years ago, a couple of guys from the club decided that they were going to resurrect that. And they went out and chopped a bunch of holes, and I think they got 1 eel. And I wouldn't want to eat the damn thing anyhow.
Well, my father used to eel with Mr. Jewett. And I remember going out to Mr. Jewett's house when I was little. But I can see my father now packing these wooden barrels with the eels. And to this day, I love fried eels. But I haven't had any for a long time.
I've asked her.
I don't think anybody's eating anymore.
Nobody does
Wrap
it.
around your arm.
No, I fry them and eat them.
The thing I couldn't get over was how tough they are to skin.
Yes.
And so, I'm with my grandfather, and he's about 820 years old, and I'm this young whippersnapper. And I had my own eel pots and stuff, so I come in with a bunch of eels, and he goes, you catch them, you got to skin them. And so I was holding the head with a pair of pliers and trying to do that, and that didn't work. So I put the head in a vise, and I'm trying to pull the skin off that. And so the excited he ever got, he'd say, "For heaven's sakes." And so he was all excited, and he went, "For heaven's sakes." And he grabbed the thing, and he held it like this, and just pulled it off. And I'm thinking, no wonder he has arms like Papa. He just held it with, thumb in his finger and pulled the damn thing off.
I think my brothers used to nail the head
Yeah.
to a post.
Yes.
And pull it in. The last eels I had, Joe Mayo brought to my
Right.
house, and we had eels, and afterwards he said, I hadn't done them quite like his mother did. Shucks, you know. But apparently, I used breadcrumbs, she did cracker crumbs, and that was enough of a difference. Joe said they were okay, but they weren't like mums.
I have a picture of my father with his dory loaded with earpods. George Reith was there, Billy Reith, and my brother Donnie. And he used to do a lot of it, not just Madaket, but also Sackatchewan. And we used to hang on the back of the boat and we'd get dragged around while he set his pots. He did eeling for quite a while.
Another old timer that lived out there was Herbert Smith. Herbert P. Smith.
Yeah.
Not Herbert Smith, but Herbert P. Smith. It's just like it was Arthur P. Dunham, not Arthur Dunham.
Mary P. Walker.
Yeah. So there was that middle initial there. So Herbert was the last survivor of the Spanish-American War. And he had glasses that looked like he stole them from some Japanese general, naval general, because they was little things. But he lived on Washington, right near where Martha lived. But here's a trivia question. Does anybody know where his house, where he moved after he got too old to be in Madaket? You know where he moved to? Well, the building's still standing, and it's now a coffee shop by the Legion.
The Handlebar.
The Handlebar Cafe.
Really?
That was Herbert's. That was Herbert's.
Last stand.
Yeah. And as a kid, that was my grandfather's uncle. And so and I was living upstairs, and so I was like, "Come on, Billy, we're gonna go see Uncle Herbert." And I just would dread it. So we'd go there. It'd be about 622 degrees in the place. And he had on, wool shirt, a sweater, socks, boots, Afghan over his legs. And he had more wintergreen on than they had in the whole East Coast. And so we'd go there at least three times a week, sit down. Herbert would immediately fall asleep because he was deaf as a doornail. He couldn't hear anything. And my grandfather would wait till Herbert fell asleep, and then he'd fall asleep. And finally, I'd.
Now I know where you get it.
Oh! Listen, it's a tradition. So it was time to go home when I finally could wake him up. But that was Herbert's house. And his daughter-in-law was Irene Smith, who was a town clerk here for years. And Irving, her husband, worked at Harry Gordon's garage by the Dreamland.
And he always spoke at our Memorial Day celebrations in whatever church we were thinking. We were falling asleep.
He
Couldn't
read,
hear, couldn't understand him.
he read the letter of something or other
Yeah,
every single Memorial Day.
right.
And all the kids in line would go, "That guy's still alive?"
I was living in Madaket, of course, when I first got married, and Mr. Smith came over one day with a bucket, and I looked in, really tiny fish in there. I said, "What?" He said, "Would you like some?" I said, "What do I do with them? Why do you cook them?" Evidently, it's scotch or something. Yeah, cook them whole. I had no idea. I took them, but I don't remember what I did. I thought he was so nice to think of me, to bring fish. But they were the tiniest little things.
I'm surprised he didn't charge you.
Well, that reminds me of Allison Pease at the heron season. He lived right down there on the creek, and that was his pastime, catch heron. And then he used to take a twig, he'd get 6 on this one, a little bigger twig, 8, 10, 12, And then he'd go through town knocking on doors,
Yeah.
He'd come to my mother's house, Irvin asked if I'd bring by a dozen heron for you. I said, okay. So, what do I owe you? Well, pay him, father come home, says, well, Mr. P's brought you heron. Heron? I didn't want any heron. He said, you got him now. And that's how he used to get rid of them.
Well, there was so much heron at the bridges that they would, it was a pecking order, and your net was big enough so that it covered the whole ditch. And you had to, if you got there early, you got the first spot. Well, as long as your net was in there, nobody else was getting anything. But your net would get full, then you'd pull it out, and immediately the next guy would be pulling his out because there were just so many. And so that was a big pastime. Another one was at the dump. Shooting rats. And it was a rite of passage, and it was tricky to be able to hold a flashlight under the barrel and not shoot who you were with. But that was, that was an occurrence, and you'd curse the fact when they had fire going there because it screwed things up. That was a big pastime.
I think something might have happened to Mr. Topham, Leland Topham, because at the cricks with the herring, because he bought a piece of land, which now is a right-of-way for any Nantucket to go through to get to the cricks. And as long as when Topham is alive, it's going to be a right-of-way. I don't know if Alan knows that or not.
I'm just going to ask you, do you know where that is?
Yes, it's on Tennessee Ave, it's Leland's Shanty. It was by Mr. McLeave's and by Nancy Chase's house.
Oh,
Right down through.
yeah, that's where you just, once you get that little park there. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, it's in the deed from the, it's in, our children own it now.
Well, it's interesting you brought that up because that dovetails into Alan's group and the Soverinos, because the property that the land bank acquired from the Soverinos, they're moving the boathouse that was down at Nancy Chase's, and they salvaged that building, and making a little park there and stuff. So, yeah, it's like anything else. It takes 10 years to get something going.
Well, the shanty floated away at some point, and Toppy, who had more money than Jack, put it up on stilts. He didn't have any children either, so that was one part. And so it's up there, and it's our children now own it, and they use it for, when they go out with one of them, or a couple of them got boats, so they go out the creeks that way.
Nice.
Do you remember that remember the Harris property?
The
Remember that?
Harris property. Harris,
What'd you say?
the Harris property.
How?
Harris.
Harris.
You know, there was the Ray property and the Harris property out there. Well, Grandpa Harris,
Clean up by Ray.
yeah,
Harris.
yeah. Grandpa Harris, his main house was down off of, I can't think of the name of it. You're down Fair Street and you got Lions, and then the last one down.
Harris on Dover Street.
It's on Fairway.
No, what's the last road? What's the last right off of Fair Street? Fair Street. So yeah, so he lived down there,
That's where he lived.
and so Sarah Harris
Probably.
was his daughter-in-law, and so she says, "I'm really concerned about him driving. He's not too careful." So they watched him. Family started watching him, and they saw his routine. And he had a garage that had the wooden doors that open up this way. So he goes out to he was driving out to Madaket, so he goes out to get his truck. And the first thing he did, he went down the end of the driveway. Goes back down, opens the door, gets in his truck, fixes his pipe, gets it going, starts the truck up, and he backs right out into the road. So they said, "Grandpa, you gotta look before you go out there." He said, "You damn fool, I did." So a wonder any of us in that neighborhood were alive.
Something I just noticed recently. The house where Captain Bill Blount used to live on Vespa Lane has been sold and being renovated now. And he's taken his boat, fishing boat, and gone back to New Bedford. You know, there's another part of Nantucket that's gone. Years ago, it was a summer activity for a lot of these summer people to go down the Island Service Wharf and look at the fishing boats and talk with the men. And I always remember this, a very talkative, nice man, skipper of a boat named the Two Brothers. He came in tied up one day and pulled the net up on the wharf all torn up. And the summer person said, "What happened?" He said, "Well, I don't know, we hooked up on something, tore the net." He said, "Well, don't you know where you're going?" He said, "Oh yeah, I know where I'm going, but I don't know exactly what the bottom looks like." "Oh," he said, "just tow the net anyway, you might get fish." He said, "Yeah, that's right." Well, he says, "You know, at that rate, anybody could be a fisherman." And Morris says to him, "You're right, anybody could be a fisherman, but there'll only be a few good ones."
So on the way to Madaket, when you get to the top of Main Street, where Monahan's used to be, and then those pesky butlers were there, there's that thing in the middle of the road there.
I hit it.
So, so when you're headed out to the West End, which way do you go when you get there?
Oh,
So now you're going to go to the cemetery. Which way do you go?
left.
Left. But if you're coming the other way from York Street to Gardner,
Yep.
which way do you go?
Well,
Whichever way makes sense.
it's not,
Whichever way I can
the thing is, it's not a rotary.
It's a monument.
Yeah. So if you really have nothing to do and your TV's broken, if you just go down and park on the side there, for a good hour or two in the summertime, it's really interesting.
Oh, I hit that when I was 15 in Cece Heiser's car.
Oh.
I only let a little ding.
Laura, thank you, this has been fun.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Great.
May I just say something?
Yes.
We didn't come out here until 1986, 85, 86. We go out on Madaket, right after Second Bridge on the right. This has been absolutely wonderful for me. There's so much more that I didn't know about. Do I want to know more? Sure, why not? I came from Eastport, Maine, so consequently, this is just another island.
Can we say one more thing? Val and Gladdy go to Madaket every single day, right? You take a ride out to Madaket every day to visit that section of the island.
That's nice.
That's part of our life.
Yeah.
Good to see you too, Bob.
Yeah.
My aunt Esther said Jackson Point was her thinking spot.
You too.
Whenever she needed to think something over really well, she'd go and park at Jackson Point and give it a good think.
Mention her.